So welcome back, everyone. I've asked John to begin this session with a meditation, and then he will do the oral transmission of the poem, and then he and I will have a little more discussion, then we're going to open it up for all of us vis-a-vis questions and perspectives. John.
Thank you, Roshi. So actually, in the Mahamudra lineage, postures, there's also a lot of emphasis on posture, in fact. And that's partially because, again, it's also there's tantric versions of it in which posture becomes even more important for the manipulation of energies in the body. They even talk about if you're leaning too much to the left, you're going to have these problems. And if you're leaning too much to the right, you're going to have these problems. It's really interesting to see that emphasis. But I think the main point is what you already know, which is that you want a posture that is both stable and alert. That has this, that's both strong and relaxed. You could even say dignified. So just finding a posture of that kind. If you'd like to assume the full, what's in the Tibetan tradition is called the 7-point posture of Vairochana, which is the posture that Roshi was demonstrating. Whatever posture will work that sustains these basic points. Stable, but alert. Strong, but relaxed. And dropping down into the body. Perhaps just a deep breath, simply to allow the body to relax. And now I invite you actually, if you have a blank wall, or if you can see an open space or sky, or even just a space in front of you in a room, it's fine if your eyes end up settling on something like something of high contrast, whatever it might be, but just allow with the eyes open. Just allow the mind simply to gaze. Just going to allow the mind to settle on its own, what we call rangbab. Semmachana sel chumanyogna dang. If you don't try to fix the mind, it will be clear. If you don't stir up the water, it will be clear. Just allow the mind to settle. No need to do anything. No need to make anything happen. Nothing to fix. Nothing to achieve. Nothing to get rid of. Not focusing outward. Not focusing inward. Not putting awareness in between. Just let go. Merely undistracted. If a thought, a sensation catches you, just recognize that it's simply an event in consciousness. No need to evaluate or give it meaning. Let go. Allow thoughts to pass like clouds in the sky. As Saraha says, the mind tied up in knots. If you just let go, it will be free. All right, now I'm going to, you may wish, if you wish, you can continue to just settle in the natural state, or you can do whatever you like. Have a cup of tea. I'm going to do the oral transmission of the text. And this is called, in Tibetan, it's called the lung, which means agama in Sanskrit. It's not lung, which is the word for energy, vayu, or wind, literally. So it's lung here, meaning that basically it's like a transmission of the text, and it's a traditional thing that's done that sort of passes the text from generation to generation. Ngeton chakya jembo monlam shuzo namon goro laman laman nanda yidon gingo la jojo dosun jojo dosun gyabo sedan chen dala jagon dage monana jishin jobe tongyo jinla zo dadan tai sanchen tanje ke sanjo nanda kanre lege be koson yume gezo chungyo nam gyabo kushe gyazo jogyo ji Disi tema toba desi do kedan keba tsere kundu yang di tandu dayang minda shen dege gaza vela juba sho. Tenjo choto, de tsun shere den shen zan den dambe chu top ne. Tsushin juk la parche mache ba zere kundu dang chu juba sho loni tobe mi shi juk la ru. Minga sambe de zon munak chom, gomjong ege ne luk jishin sel shere sungi nawa geba sho. Tache tata deni shi den doku tada zoni lamcho ki si shi. Tada tuni deto be kuchu mebe chun chodan treba sho janshi seni. Xiaodong zongzho la zhongzhe chachen dongzhe nanzho che janja lobo chube chima nam jande chi tel chuku ngyo sho. Shilo dodo chupa dawe den de la ma yin kyongwa gongbe ne. Gongtong gongna cao zhang chube chou, da gong chube den 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 ba sho, chen dan da je sengi nan chu te, sen ni sen me sengi ngong wo tong, da je ma ga, che ya na wa te, le bar ta ne shi za chupa sho. Yu ma nyong we ran na yu du chu, ma ri wang ki ran ni da du chu, ni zin wang ki si bi long du kyang ma ne chube, se da chupa sho, yu ba ma yin ge we kyang ma zik, me ma yin kong de kung ki shi, ge du ma yin zung chu u me lang, ta da sen ki chun ni to pa sho, di yin shi ba kang ki zin ba me, di men shi ja kang ki kak ba me, lo le de be chun ni du ma je,
Yanda Tongi Tane Basho, Dini Mato Kowe Gazo, Dini Tona Sange Shena Me, Taji Dian Dimin Kaya Me, Juni Kunjin Sani Rigbasho, Nayan Sana Toyan Senyente, Tongan Sana Joyan Rangi Sem. Jiajiang San La Gajiang San Yan Bei, Rodo Tangji San La Zhiba Shou, Lu Ji Zi Wei Gong Ge Ma Le Jin, Tama Du Zi Long Ge Ma Ge Ba, Ma Zhu Niu Ma Ramba Zhou Shi Bei, Sem Tu Niang Len Ke Shin Kiong Wang Shou, Zha Da Dou Bei Ba Lap Rang Sa Shi, Yu Mei Sen Ge Zhu Wang Ngang Ge Ne, Jing Bu Niu Ma. Chima Dan Zha Wei, Shi Ne Gia Zu Mi Yu Tong Ba, Den Ba Shou, Da Mei San Le Yang Yang De Bei Zi, Tong Mei Tun Ni Ji Jin La Ge Tong, Yin Min Tun La, Tetsun Chuba Ni, Chumei Rangon Rangi Shepa Shou, Yula Debi Yume, Sensu Tong, Senla Debi Zeme Ngo Tong, Nila Debi Ninzen Ransa De, Esa Senge Nelu Topa Shou, Yujin Dawa Dini Chakya Che, Tadan Dawa Uma Chenpo Yin, Dini Kundu Zokchen Shekyanja, Jikshe Kundun Tokwe Den Top Shou, Shenpa Mebe Dechen, Yunje Me, Zenzen Mebe Esa Dio Del, Lole Debi Mito Longi Do, Zeme Nanun Gunje Meba Shou, Zan Zhen Yang Ji Zimba, Ranza Zheng, Gento Chupa, Ranjin Yinsu Da, Tama Shepa, Banan, Zhao Me, Zhu De Chunyi Demba, Tokpa Shou, Zhuwei Ranjin Dan Do Sake Kyang, Mato Wangi Tame Kowa Kyam, Dunga Mutame Be Senjen La, Zume Ninja Yula Kiewa Shou, Zume Ninja Zaya Maga Be, Zedu Ngo, Tong Dun, Jemba Shar, Zungju Kusa Zhuwei Lam Chok Di, 这每年在共同公报说，共同内中简单贡献党，甚至民间三个奖项，三个民间三个新人奖，三个全nam。日本莫兰走，日本奖送他进三个说，就给我谁当这当，都这当那个给我今年预备图，得到大等生成，但这给莫兰那的就是如果这。Nghe tan chake champa mulan she jawa che kama baranjan doje zebao.
All right.
All right, John. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So we'll now move into the chat stream is open for questions and also raised hands. And we already have a question. We do. Would you and John share your thoughts on the use of psychedelic medicines in facilitating non-dual experiences? Thank you.
You don't know anything about that, Roshi?
No. Question from yesterday. I think I'll skip. Anyway.
I mean, I would say that the issue of so you could think of psychedelic. I'm going to say something. You know a lot more than I do, but I'm going to say some of you may not know that Roshi has a whole history of serious research in this area, but seriously, like, pioneer. But I will say that I'm involved a little bit in some this work here at the University of Wisconsin, and there's evidence that, for example, a single dose of psilocybin could possibly there's evidence that for some people at least it leads to the remission of treatment-resistant depression for several months, which is remarkable, actually, from a clinical point of view. And why that is, we're not too sure yet. We have some theories, and some of them probably are about kind of wiping out the story, so to speak. And since these substances can induce ego dissolution, you might think that in some ways it's doing something similar to what Tantra is doing, which is to say, induce a non-dual experience through a physical process, through a manipulation of the mind-body energies, right? And then you induce it. But the key thing is you then have to have there's got to be this moment of recognition where it's pointed out to you what the nature of the mind is. And I don't know that that's how easy that is with psychedelics, because it can be quite. First of all, you have to have a very experienced person, but also the experience itself can, depending on the substance, it can be sort of deadening at a certain level. So, so it really, I think it depends a lot, maybe on the individual too. I would not say it's a very, just like Tantra, it can be dangerous.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, that there is an effect often. And, I think some of you know, I worked with psychedelics, with LSD as an adjunct to psychotherapy. In the early 1970s, my husband, Stanislav Grof, and I worked at the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center and did this research under the auspice of the National Institute of Mental Health with people who were in the final phases of their life. And it was really powerful. And I remember, we went all over the world speaking about this work. The outcomes were pretty positive across the board for people. But I remember some doctor in Hawaii said, it just doesn't look very efficient. And I was like, oh my God, because, and he said that because the process wasn't just a matter of administering a high dose of LSD, 600 micrograms. In fact, is what we worked with of Sandoz, LSD. It involved very intensive and deep preparation. On the day of the administration of the psychedelic, we were with the person for at least 18 hours in preparation for the trip, and then during the duration of the journey and afterwards. And then we did very intensive work after the experience with the person. And in a number of our people, we worked with their families as well. So it was a whole package. And it was extraordinary. And to me, it was a contemporary rite of passage that for me personally, I feel we've underestimated our mind and we underestimated the human unconscious. It's just an extraordinary experience to be witness to what unfolded in the course of these sessions. Pretty consistently from person to person, their deaths, which we except in a few cases, but we mostly were not there to witness the moment of death, but the dying process, the active dying process was accompanied by a view which was similar to the kind of view that John and I have been referencing. And then, of course, all of our patients died, of course. So that was the pioneering research in the field. And it was really fascinating to see how effective that work was. But as John said, any medicine that is that powerful could have an adverse effect. And we have many examples of, people literally going off the rails, even with expertly guided sessions. And there are two forms of this therapy. One is called psycholytic, which is repeated small doses. And this was done in Europe. And I think it's done at Johns Hopkins now in the East Bay by Bill Williams and that team, lower doses of psilocybin. And then the psychedelic therapy that we did at the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center was, quotes, a single overwhelming dose. But what I think is interesting, so our patients, our people didn't live much longer than their psychedelic experience. So the taste that turned them around was very fresh in their mouth. I think what is interesting is, how, what happens after the experience. And I can cite, from the point of view of people like Gary Snyder and Allen Ginsberg and, all of my contemporaries and somewhat elders who ended up in the arms of Buddhist practice, we sort of, gave up this more dramatic approach. And I myself could not imagine repeating the experience, except hopefully at my death, it'll be an interesting experience without the aid of anything external. But a number of us were brought to practice exactly by taking psychedelics. And we did not continue, of course, taking psychedelics because practice provided something that involved deep stabilization, and also for some of my contemporaries, continuous unfolding of insight. But I think it's very worthwhile done with set and setting properly aligned.
There's a mengak, which is Kangla Shenpa Yuna Deang Tong, one of these, like oral lineage instructions, which means whatever you're attached to, give that up too. And or Shenpa, this like emotional clinging thing. And so one of the issues I think sometimes with psychedelics is people get a lot of Shenpa toward the psychedelics themselves. That's just something I've observed, having done some work in this community. And sometimes people kind of, become fixated on it. So that would be possibly a worry, but definitely, I'm not saying it's not I just want to endorse what Roshi's saying. A lot of the research Roshi did has more recently been replicated, and there's a lot of interest now. But it's not, I think, just a straightforward kind of, like a fast track to enlightenment or something.
Well, I also think that the vision of enlightenment, and we'll be exploring this in February, which is articulated particularly in the Flower Garland Sutra, the Avatamsaka Sutra, which is kind of glorious. It's great. But in Zen, ultimately, it's ordinary mind,
right?
Beginner's mind. And so the attachment to drama, to
Yes.
the glorious, fireworks experience, it's terrific. But it's transitory, and you can't get a bus ticket when you're under the influence of one of those. So it is hard to do grocery shopping, I can tell you, in that state. No, it's a transitory phenomenon. So, but yeah, I don't, I actually don't regret my past experiences. And I actually, to be perfectly transparent, I had glorious experiences, and I had some experiences which were extraordinarily difficult and were difficult to shed. And so I wouldn't write it as a prescription without, certain conditions being in place. And it really, I will, one more transparency. It really brought me to practice. I went, whoa, I don't want to be in that state of mind all the time. That is not useful. And so using the grounding aspect of practice and then stripping away the decorations has been a really important part of my own spiritual formation.
Roshi, there are a couple of questions in the chat that maybe I could answer real quick. So yeah. Gary had a question about verse 13 in the prayer of Mahamudra about the word alaya. And as I said yesterday, alaya there is not alaya vijnana, the storehouse consciousness. It really is just referring to the nature of the mind itself, which is the dharmata. And yes, Gary, it is the same as dharmakaya in that context. And then Donna said, thank you both for your insight, but one question, it seems, John, that you logically take apart interconnectedness and it is dismissed. In your view, can't there be a state beyond human understanding, perception that allows interconnectedness to be, perhaps something more fluid than the net of Indra? And my answer just would be that I don't, dismissed, I think maybe isn't the right term. It's like, I'm just not going to affirm ultimately interdependence. But another way of saying this is that interdependence is a model. And so, a model is not reality. So no, and the whole kind of the part of the point here is that whatever model we have, it's not reality. So we can use the idea of interconnectedness or interdependence or Indra's web is useful. But again, if we cling to it like this is the truth, then actually it becomes unuseful. So those were a couple of questions I saw. I don't see if there's anything else you see, Roshi, in the chat, and then we have a hand up too.
Yeah, we have a hand up. Maxwell?
Go ahead, Maxwell.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, firstly, thank you for all that's been offered this weekend. I feel almost overwhelmed with joy of how deep this has gone. But my question is, I've only sort of scratched the surface with understanding how dreams are used in a Tibetan context. So I was wondering if, John, if you could maybe explain how this applies to Mahamudra and why it is that within a dream, the potency of practice is so great. Maybe because of seeing a reality dissolve into emptiness is more feasible in that sort of environment. And then Roshi Joan, I don't know if this has an application in Zen, but I swear I remember talking about Dogen at a separate time you mentioned dreaming. I could be making that up. So if there's anything that comes up for you, I'd love to hear that as well. And deep bow to you both. Thank you.
I just quickly say in terms of the dream practice, Maxwell, it's very important in the Mahamudra tradition, especially in the more tantric side. And it's one of the so-called 6 yogas of Naropa. I don't know if practice in the dream is necessarily more powerful per se, but I think that one thing about the dream that's, one way of understanding why dream practice is really useful is that when you have a lucid, so dream practice is, begins with recognizing the dream and then manipulating the dream and then enhancing the dream. So when you do and that first step of recognition is obviously kind of the critical one. You need to recognize that you're dreaming, and then to be able to, so when you recognize a dream, if you go, oh, I'm dreaming, as you may know, what happens is that usually wakes you up. Because in order to sustain the dream, you have to pay attention to it. So you have to know you're dreaming. So when you're lucid dreaming, you know you're dreaming. But if you say to yourself, oh, I'm dreaming, you can say that a little bit. But if you say it too much, again, the dream will dissolve because you're not sustaining it, actually. You're focusing instead on the fact that you're dreaming. So you have to sort of be aware of being in the dream, going through the dream world in the lucid dream in a way that is actually drawing on that non-dual aspect of awareness, because you're knowing it without forefronting it, without making it an object. You understand what I mean? So that's one of the main reasons why it's a very useful kind of practice, because then you're actually also, you're not just sitting there, you're actually engaged in activity in the dream while sustaining the awareness of it being a dream, without that awareness being conceptual. And without that awareness being about introspection, like turning in and saying, oh, look at me, I'm dreaming. Okay? Does that make sense? And Roshi, I think Max.
Oh, yeah. I don't know Maxwell. I think you dreamed it.
That's a good Roshi answer. Do we have any other hands up? And I'll also try to look through the chat here.
Somebody asked about felt sense, and it is a felt sense is knowing through the body. It's a kind of process that is fundamentally non-conceptual.
I would say a quick for Kathy about having concern about consort practice. So one thing to know, Kathy, is that certainly, this is an area where there can certainly be abuse and has been, as with so many other contexts in religious traditions. But the way it's supposed to work is that it's not an uneven relationship. It's supposed to be the two people are supposed to be at the same level of practice. And they are equal, actually. That's extremely important in that practice, in the consort practice. So it's not supposed to be a hierarchical relationship, and it's not like one person is being used for the other. Both of them are simultaneously inducing this state in each other. So it's not supposed to be kind of like one person is used for another person's purpose or something like that. So just so you know, that doesn't mean it always works that way, but that's the way it's supposed to work.
And there are a couple of questions about having a teacher. In the Buddhist context, we say there are three treasures: the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And the Buddha refers to the historical Buddha, of course, and the legendary Buddha, but it also refers to your relationship with someone who is your teacher. And, a teacher doesn't, I always smile when people say, the Dalai Lama is my teacher. And I go, oh, good. Hopefully you find someone who is a good spiritual friend, who has more experience than you, who cares about your well-being, and who's failed a lot. So, and I won't say that having a teacher is absolutely necessary, but I can say, as someone who has been in a student-teacher relationship since 1975, I cannot imagine being without that kind of guidance, inspiration, and also struggle. I say that in the student-teacher relationship, there are three phases. One is idealization, when we project our enlightenment onto our teacher. Oh, and that poor teacher who has to receive it. But maybe the Tibetans do that better than the Zens. The second is demonization, and it's when you project all your negative content onto your teacher. And that's generally where you get your bus ticket and flee. And then the third phase is normalization. And, John, you were describing this in the consort relationship. It is where there's equality, but difference, and a high degree of mutuality. And that's, what is suggested, for example, between Buddha and the Buddha and Mahakashapa, the sense of mutuality. Transmission is not a one-way deal. It's the arising of mutuality. It's interfusion. So I think a teacher is my teachers have been incredibly important to me. And I've had three main Zen teachers since 1975. And then I've studied with some exceptional, wonderful lamas over the years as well. But I just was a Zen person since the mid-60s and pretty much stayed there. But like many Western practitioners, we'll have a main thing. So my main thing is Zen, but we also study with Theravadan and Tibetan teachers. And that's been been very helpful for a number of us who, have moved between traditions, but staying firmly grounded in our root tradition. And always, even after death, deriving the death of our teachers, deriving inspiration from those who have taken us close to their heart.
And I would just add, in practical terms, someone asked, I forget who, but someone asked about finding a teacher in this time of isolation. And there are some, you have Upaya is here, and there are many programs. And I think, again, one of the best way to get involved with a teacher is to be engaged with their community, because, sometimes things that aren't going to work are not obvious when you just do a one-on-one or whatever with a teacher, but then it becomes super obvious once you hang out with the people around the teacher. You can know a lot about a teacher by spending time with the people around the teacher. And but in this, so there's right now in terms of online, I think there are, Upaya is obviously one. My teacher, Chukenipa Rinpoche, has a program that's called the Triple Excellence Program, which is based on a particular practice of the goddess Tara that I do also. And that and they have a whole community, and they do stuff together, very structured. You learn a lot. There's a lot of emphasis on kind of learning stuff as well, about not just, kind of chanting or something, but really learning. And then also the Tergar International, the Tergar community online with Mingyu Rinpoche, I'm somewhat familiar with, and I've done some teaching for them. And they're also really, super organized and really structured learning. So you can do, those are 3 places I think that it would be great, just to start even online in those contexts. You get to know those people. And then when the time comes to actually meet those teachers in person, whether it's Roshi at Upaya or Shigenyam Rinpoche in Kathmandu, or when he comes to Europe or the US, or Mingyur Rinpoche, who's many places around the world where you can meet him, that then, you will have already have spent some time with the community, and you'll have a sense of if that is working for you or not. So I think it's not even though it's difficult with the level of isolation, I don't think it's an impossible thing to really start working on developing a relationship with a teacher, especially by developing a relationship with the teacher's community.
That's a very good point, John. I'm just remembering a funny story. 1984, the psychiatrist R.D. Lang was in a program with me and a number of other teachers. And one of those teachers was a Korean Zen teacher. And Lang couldn't stand this guy. I mean, really. And Lang is this psychiatrist who works with schizophrenics, absolutely brilliant, just crazy as a loon, wonderful. And I remember sitting, next to Lang, and he snarled at this Korean, and he said, "You're no teacher," and this kind of just spewing the toxins. And I remember the teacher said, "Well, I have something to ask you." "Yes," said, growled Lang. And he says, "Does the sun teach you?" "Yes." "Does the moon teach you? Does the earth teach you?" "Well," and Lang said yes repeatedly. He said, "Well, if they teach you, then I teach you." Which I thought was pretty clever.
That's a pretty good one. That's a good
And
one.
it is true, everything is teaching us. And that is one of the when Suzuki Roshi coined the term beginner's mind, Mushin, is translated into English as beginner's mind. It's this kind of freshness. Glassman talked about this in terms of not knowing. It's just having this kind of openness and letting our experience teach us, being interested, being curious. So I thought, anyways, I think it's great to have an embodied teacher. And, the thing about embodied teachers is they're also human beings. So,
Yes.
they go, we go off the rails, and sometimes really badly. So, discern deeply. And as John said, check out their students.
Oh yeah, that's the biggie. That's a real biggie. Baltazar, you have your hand up.
Hello, thank you for your shared exchange so much. So I have a question. I've never had as many questions about a specific class that I've joined, except but this one I have many. And perhaps my main one is that when I first read the Mahamudra, I felt like I connected perhaps by heart. I didn't have many questions at all. But when John approached it, it became a far more rational and conclusive experience. I began having questions. I began to question little things. For example, the verse 3 in the Mahamudra, I can read it for you if you want. It says, until the time that we attain that, may we throughout every lifetime never hear the words bad actions and suffering, and enjoy the glorious ocean of good actions and happiness. And perhaps in my heart, I know what the person who said it comes from. But rationally, in the approach John gave us to the Mahamudra, I felt like it was very unrealistic to wish for something like that. As in, what are we born for then? If we are born, then we will is to be exposed to all. I would understand, but I guess in this Mahamudra, as it was presented to us later, it became just an irrational prayer, just unrealistic. And I don't know if
Yes, I would say, you know, it is, so part of what's important to remember about this kind of genre of the prayer is it is, in a way, it is unrealistic, right? It's sort of creating there's an imaginative act involved in being doggedly optimistic, you know, insisting on a certain, like really trying to create a beautiful vision. And there are going to be cultural differences. So this is a very both Indian and Tibetan kind of like image of how a person would lead their life until they finally get awakened, that they live, you know, happily and with contentment. You know, of course, they have suffering, inevitable suffering. But the idea here is this kind of, you know, hyperbole, like an exaggerated sense of we're just going to live, you know, in bliss. And it's meant to give a kind of image of comfort for those times when things are not going well, actually. It's a sort of, I don't know, it's like maybe if you like to go to the beach, you know, it's like, well, in a few months I'll be able to go spend some time on the beach anyway. So it's really an image that's meant to be for a certain stage of practice, where, in other words, it's kind of saying, until I get there, while I'm an ordinary person, whatever kind of gives me comfort, may that come. So this image may not work for you as comfort, but there may be other things, like maybe, you know, a nice a stack of cookies and a glass of milk. You know, or whatever it is, you could just replace that verse with whatever. So that's the idea of that verse, is is to kind of encourage you to find comfort even in samsara. I hope that helps, Balthazar.
that helps.
Good.
Thank you. So John,
And yes, Roshi, are we up? Time coming up here. We have one more. Jim, maybe we could do Jim and then.
okay.
Jim? Okay.
And
Go ahead,
thank you,
Jim.
Balthazar. Nice to see you.
Thank you. Roshi, I was wondering how you would compare the experiences that, you know, from your research with psychedelics with the experiences that are discussed in the Bardo Todal in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. If they're similar, or
You know, I haven't done a fine-grained analysis of that, and that is because every person that we sat with had a unique experience. You know, it's not that I could say this is the pattern. The most frequent pattern described by people, and it came out of Stan's research, had to do with the reliving of biological birth in terms of the basic perinatal matrices. Remember, if you looked at his work, it's BPM 1, 2, 3, and 4. One is, you know, floating in the amniotic fluid in a state of bliss. 2 is, let's see, 2 is you're beginning the fight, 3 is you're constricted, and 4, you're out. So, you know, that this was a discovery that Stan made, that people in these states can relive their biological birth. But in terms of the Bardo Todal, in terms of the after the death point, so to speak, the after death experience, I have a feeling that our own conditioning in a certain way, you know, I don't think I'm going to see any Tibetan deities in the, you know, I think I mean, I might, but I might very well might not. So I don't know. And the other thing is that I think making these comparisons can lead to generalizations in an interesting way. And that's why I said every person with whom we worked really had a unique experience. And this goes also to a question that someone asked earlier about. I mentioned yesterday that in some ways all paths do not lead up the mountain. You know, again, generalizing that all paths are going to take you to great view, to profound perception, I think is probably not the case at all. I don't think that our perspective in Buddhism of the actualization of Buddha nature is shared by all spiritual and religious traditions. And so I want to, you know, have the kind of heart mind that opens to distinctions and differences. You know, it'd be like saying John's enlightenment is like the Dalai Lama's enlightenment is like
Right.
yours or mine.
Right. It's like, yes. And I think that's something that's really quite interesting about the Buddhist tradition is not only a tolerance for a diversity of images of what, you know, awakening looks like. There's a core of, you know, when we get to the ultimate, like very clearly, certainly the Zen traditions and Chokzok, Mamudra Dzogchen in Tibet have not a lot of differences in terms of their view, actually.
I mean, it's no bells, no whistles in Zen.
Yeah, no
I'm
bells, no
sorry to
whistles,
say.
but the view is
The view
very,
is the same.
the view is basically the same, but then the expression of the view can be very different, right? And also how, you know,
How it's realized.
how it's realized, and that diversity is not only tolerated in Buddhism, it's actually encouraged. Because of this idea of the 84,000 different forms of the Dharma for 84,000 different personality types, where 84,000 just means a whole lot. And then on top of it, the image of, you know, the huge diversity in the Tibetan world, for example, in the Indian and Tibetan world of these different, you know, which deity you want to look like, take your pick. So
I look like you, John.
sorry, I don't think I'm in the
So,
pantheon.
you know, many great questions are now popping into the chat stream, and we will, we just have to wait. First, I'd like to invite you to join Rohatsu Session, which is our practice period, very powerful in early December, or winter practice period, or join John, me, Evan, and Roshi Enkyo for what is enlightenment in early February. And we will, you know, tangle and untangle that question in our different ways. And I want to offer my deep thanks to all of you for hanging in there through this journey. And beloved John, as always, it's just so much fun, so edifying as well, to have this really precious and intimate time with you. And people from all over the world, thank you so much. And Noah and Joanne for holding the background. And as is our custom, I ask us to consider the 4 vows of the Bodhisattva, and then John will dedicate the merit.
Thank you, Roshi. Before we do the vows, just let me say thank you very much to you. I look forward to the next time, to February and beyond. And also thank you to the whole Upaya crew, Noah and everybody for you know, all of the tech support and just making it happen. So it's a precious place, Upaya. Let's be sure to keep it alive and thriving.
Good point, John. Yeah, we're in it. We're in quite a thing. Your help greatly appreciated. Really, any amount, so appreciated. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to transform them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The awakened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it.
Evam savamanam kutva yamaya saritam shubham tenasyam sarva sattaram sarva dukha prashantikut
By whatever virtue I have accomplished through having done all this, may I become one who calms all the suffering of all sentient beings. Sonandi tanji zibani topnenya bedanon panjene. Geganaje bala tubai sibezele do do shon. Through this merit, may all beings attain the omniscient state of enlightenment and conquer the enemy of false and delusion. May they all be liberated from this ocean of samsara and from its pounding waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. The supreme mind of enlightenment, where it has not yet arisen, may it arise, and where it has arisen, may it grow evermore.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everybody. May your life go well. Please take care. Please stay safe.